flowing quite well.
And it carries on flowing in lightsome fashion towards Chalfont St Giles. 150 years ago, this stretch of the Misbourne was used commercially.
There was a factory, a small working factory, which actually assembled pith helmets.
Pith helmets?
Yeah, pith helmets. So these were actually used for the service people on the South African campaign and also shipped to India for our troops there. But they were actually loaded onto a sort of flat-bottom barge and pulled by horse down to Mill Lane and then loaded onto a horse and cart and then transported to the railway station at Gerrards Cross.
Do you know, I simply can't imagine that this little waterway could be used to carry anything at all.
In the winters when snow came and it was freezing, the river would be frozen solid and our children would skate all the way down the fields to the very end. The disappearing river is right, it comes and goes and we're thrilled to see it back again.
What about that for wishful thinking? Obviously there was a ford here one time and there may be again one day, who knows. But for the moment this is where the River Misbourne does its traditional vanishing act, about a mile out of Chalfont St Giles. And no, you won't need to test your brakes. It's no coincidence that the pumping station's just around the corner. At one time, the water companies were abstracting 65% of Misbourne water to cope with the domestic demand. Thanks especially to a Trojan called Vic Wotton, who campaigned tirelessly, abstractions have been halved in recent years. Not that it benefits the next village downstream.
This is an old Roman stone under which, believe it or not, ran the River Misbourne in Chalfont St Giles. As you can see, the river simply disappeared. It's been gone now for the last 6 years. But my goodness, if the water ever runs again, they'll be dancing in the streets.
I learned to swim in it.
Did you?
Yes.
Was it that deep?
It was about 3 foot, I suppose. There, not all the way, but it was much wider than it is now too.
It's a shame, isn't it? It's not here.
Terrible.
You flooded once here, didn't you?
Oh, we flooded several times, yeah.
The reason the pond's still here is that the National Rivers Authority spent £50,000 lining it, plus the fact that the water comes from a borehole these days, not the river.
And what do you know, as if by magic, the river reappears 2 miles downstream at Chalfont St Peter, much to Chalfont St Giles' chagrin, because there's a heck of a rivalry between the two villages. So have you any idea what to expect today?
Well, the last measurement, about 3 weeks ago, it was the highest it had been for 3 years.
Good gracious.
After a couple of weeks of dry weather, I suspect it might have topped and start going down again now.
But you never can tell.
You never can tell.
That's basically a dipstick, is it?
It's like a dipstick. It's an electrical circuit which is completed when the weight at the bottom hits the water and then the light comes on. That is a depth of the water table from this point of 2 meters 77 centimeters.
What do you think of that?
It has gone down 10 centimeters in the last 3 weeks.
Here's a cutting from the Sunday Referee, January 1939. Women pray on banks of Hoodoo River. They stood with hands clasped and heads bowed on the bank of the River Misbourne at Chalfont St Peter. They prayed for peace because, according to a strong local tradition, when the River Misbourne dries up, it's a sign of impending war. And of course, 8 months later, the Second World War broke out. This is refreshing on a hot day.
Very refreshing, isn't it?
Painful underfoot.
Yes. And yet, last year, this was bone dry. Most of the country, or a good deal of the country, was having floods. Tewkesbury, Evesham, for instance, up in Yorkshire. But the Misbourne remained absolutely dry throughout that period.
Not a drop of water.
Not a drop of water. Yes.
Does it affect people's mood when it's here?
Oh, I think it does. There's an air of malaise in some villages in the Chilterns when their river dries up. Now, something is wrong with the world if the river's not running.
In part 2, the truth behind the lost villages of Leicestershire.